Hi guys, and thanks for tuning in. In tonight's video, we're diving deep into the dark side of fashion, the trends that murdered, poisoned, or permanently disfigured those who dared to follow them. But before we begin, if you like my story, please consider giving this video a like and a subscribe. And without further ado, find your comfy place and let's get started. History books tell us people used to dress with elegance, grace, and class. What they don't mention, half the time the outfits were actively trying to take them out, if you know what I mean. You think skinny jeans are uncomfortable? Try wearing 20 pounds of fabric soaked in poison while balancing a hairstyle the size of a small SUV. And yes, at some point, people looked at mercury-laced makeup and said, yeah, I'll put that on my face. When we think of fashion risks today, we're usually talking about wearing socks with sandals or trusting low-rise jeans again. But in the past, fashion wasn't just risky, it was lethal. Today we're looking at some of history's most stylish death traps, outfits and beauty trends that were so dangerous you had to risk your life to look good. Because apparently, looking fabulous was worth internal bleeding, toxic poisoning, or spontaneous combustion. Let's get into it. In the 1800s, green was the color. But that gorgeous emerald shade, it came from arsenic. Yes, the stuff you'd use to kill rats. Women wore dresses dyed with it. Decorators used it in wallpaper. And everyone basically said, toxic? Never heard of her. Problem is, arsenic doesn't just sit quietly. It flakes off. It gets inhaled and causes sores, vomiting, and death. You know, all the good signs of a good time at a ball. In the early 1800s, green was the it color. Everyone wanted it. But the natural green dyes available at the time were dull, and they faded quickly. Then came Scheele's green in the 1770s, followed by the brighter Paris green in the 1800s, both made with arsenic compounds. These colors, they were intense, vibrant, and they stayed vivid. And you guys, people were obsessed. It wasn't just used for dresses either. Arsenic green showed up in gloves, hats, artificial flowers, wallpaper, children's toys, and even desserts. Because apparently the vibe was, if it's not deadly, is it even fashionable? These poisonous gowns, they weren't cheap. So they were mostly worn by the upper and upper middle classes, wealthy women who could afford custom-made clothing and attend lavish events. Wearing a bright green ball gown in the 1840s or the 1850s was a status symbol. It said, I have money, taste, and apparently no regard for my liver. Exact prices are hard to pin down, but green dresses dyed with arsenic pigments were often luxury items. A bespoke arsenic-dyed gown could cost the equivalent of hundreds to thousands of dollars today, depending on the material and the designer. And while the rich wore them for glamour, working-class women often made them, and they suffered way more. The factory workers and dressmakers who handled the arsenic-laced fabric were the first to fall ill. Their fingers developed sores, their lungs burned from the fumes, and some died slowly from chronic exposure. But it didn't stop there. Women who wore the dresses also began experiencing symptoms: nausea, skin irritation, and ulcers. One woman's death in 1861 was even officially linked to the dye of her dress. The press dubbed her the Arsenic Girl. At the time, there were warnings. Medical experts raised concerns, and newspapers began running dresses with headlines like poisonous dresses. But instead of banning the dye, some doctors just advised women not to sweat while wearing it. Yeah, very helpful. It wasn't until the late 19th century, when synthetic dyes replaced arsenic pigments, that this trend, It finally faded out, literally. So next time you're debating whether your outfit is worth the pain, just be glad it doesn't involve slow chemical poisoning. So if arsenic green dresses slowly poisoned you from the outside, corsets took a more hands-on approach. These garments didn't wait around for chemical reactions, they just went straight for your ribs. Corsets were one of the most iconic and enduring fashion trends in history. For centuries, they sculpted the female silhouette into the ideal shape: small waist, lifted bust, and zero ability to take a deep breath. Early corsets were made from stiff fabrics like linen or cotton and reinforced with whalebone. Yes, literal whale bones. Later on, steel boning came into fashion just in case you wanted to add some industrial strength to your undergarments. They were laced tightly in the back to pull the waist in, and the tighter the waist, the more fashionable the figure, or at least the more likely you were to faint dramatically at the opera. Corsets weren't just a style statement, they were a social one. A tiny waist symbolized wealth, discipline, and femininity. And if you could afford to have your internal organs gently shuffled for fashion, you were probably doing well in life. Girls started wearing them young, and by the time they were adults, many couldn't even imagine dressing or standing without one. Let's be clear, not everyone was out here trying to lace their waist down to 16 inches, but tight lacing, when women wore corsets extremely tight for long periods, did cause real health problems. We're talking about trouble breathing, fainting, acid reflux, and in some cases, actual rib deformation. Basically, your internal organs had to learn how to live in a studio apartment. That said, some of the more dramatic stories, like corset causing infant death or permanent organ failure, were exaggerated or used as scare tactics by reformers. Most women wore corsets moderately. Think of it like shapewear today. Some versions are snug and wearable, others like you're trying to squeeze a watermelon into a keyhole. Working class women usually wore more flexible corsets to allow for movement. After all, it's pretty hard to haul around laundry, cook dinner, or hold down a job if you can't afford a bend at the waist. Corsets are a fascinating case of beauty standards taken to the extreme. They were stylish, symbolic, and depending on how tightly you laced them, a little suffocating. They may have not poisoned you like arsenic, but they definitely gave your organs a bit of a workout, all in the name of looking flawless in a ball gown. So after squeezing your waist into steel-boned hourglasses and risking fainting spells just by standing upright, what else could fashionable women in the past possibly do to push the limits of survival? Well, how about smearing toxic heavy metals directly onto their faces? Because nothing says radiant beauty like lead poisoning in a jar. In the 1700s and the 1800s, pale skin wasn't just a preference. It was practically a social requirement. A pale complexion meant you were wealthy, refined, and most importantly, not working outside like a commoner. But if you weren't naturally ghostly enough, there was always a little help, a little powder, a little paint, and a lot of lead. Lead-based cosmetics, most famously Venetian ceruse, were made from white lead mixed with vinegar or water. The result? It was a smooth, opaque paste that could be slathered over the face to cover blemishes, even out skin tone, and give that fashionable porcelain look. It looked flawless in candlelight, which, unfortunately, also disguised the fact that your skin was slowly falling apart underneath. And by the way, it was extremely dangerous. Lead is a neurotoxin, and reported exposure can cause everything from hair loss and skin corrosion to muscle weakness, tremors, memory loss, and if you really commit to it, death. Many women experienced facial scarring, blackened teeth, and open sores under the makeup. But instead of stopping, They just applied more makeup to cover the damage, creating a vicious and visibly decaying cycle. It wasn't just the average socialite wearing this stuff. Nobility and royalty, no, they were big fans too. Remember Queen Elizabeth I? She famously used lead-based ceruse throughout her entire life to maintain her iconic white face, even after it began eating away at her skin. By the end of her life, it said she wore layers upon layers of the paste to mask the damage it had done. So yes, she was serving looks, but also maybe mild neurological damage. So you gotta ask, did people know that their makeup was dangerous? Well, yes and no. There were warnings as early as the 1600s with doctors writing about the dangers of lead, but much like today's debates over harmful beauty standards, fashion often won out over science. Besides, some people thought the risks were worth it. After all, pale skin, it could secure a good marriage or elevate your social standing. And back then, dying young was just kind of part of the deal. Lead-based makeup is a chilling example of how beauty ideals have pushed people to literally harm themselves in the name of appearance. It may have given them a flawless look, but it came out to a devastating cost, one layer at a time. So if you've ever had a bad reaction to drugstore foundation, just remember, at least it didn't slowly poison you to death. Probably. So after powdering your face with lead and squeezing your organs into a corset, you might be thinking, surely the rest of the outfit was a bit more forgiving? Well, not exactly. Because next up came the crinoline skirt. Light, airy, dramatic, and highly flammable. Basically, you looked like a rotating bell, but at any moment you could turn into a human candle. In the mid-19th century, the crinoline became the must-have item in every fashion woman's wardrobe. These massive, dome-shaped skirts gave women an exaggerated hourglass figure, making the waist appear tiny and the silhouette dramatic. Think Bridgerton, but a little bit more dangerous. Originally, crinoline referred to a stiff fabric made of horsehair and linen, but by the 1850s, it evolved into a steel cage-like structure when worn under a dress to hold it out to a wide, open, round shape. The result? You look like you were gliding across the room, but underneath you were basically wearing a birdcage strapped to your waist. But seriously, why were the dresses so big? Well, the bigger the skirt, the better. Wide skirts were seen as elegant, fashionable, and a sign that you didn't have to work or move quickly, because honestly, you physically couldn't. Some crinolines reached up to 6 feet in diameter. That's not a dress, that's a mobile hazard zone. But here's where things took a deadly turn. These giant skirts were often made of lightweight, flammable fabrics like muslin, tulle, or cotton. Combine that with open fireplaces, candles, and oil lamps, and you've got a recipe for disaster. If the skirt caught fire, the steel cage underneath made it nearly impossible to extinguish quickly or to tear off. Women were literally trapped inside their own clothing. And this wasn't just a theatrical danger, it was horrifyingly common. Reports from the time estimate that hundreds of women died in crinoline-related fires during the mid-1800s. Aside from the fire hazard, crinolines were just wildly impractical. Women struggled to sit, fit through doorways, or even feel the floor under their feet. And don't get me started on windy days. Some ladies quite literally blew over. There are accounts of skirts knocking over furniture, trapping small children underneath, and even causing women to fall off staircases. Beauty was pain, and sometimes property damage. Crinoline skirts were the 19th century equivalent of fashion over function. Sure, they looked grand, but they turned everyday activities into survival challenges. It's one thing to suffer for fashion. It's another thing to burst into flames at a dinner party because you stood too close to the fireplace. Now, after dealing with flammable skirts, poisonous makeup, and corsets that doubled as medieval torture devices, you'd think the beauty industry might ease up a bit. But oh no, we're just getting started. Because in the early 20th century, someone had a brilliant idea. What if your face could literally glow with radiation? Spoiler alert, it did, but not in a good way. In the 1910s and 20s, radium wasn't just the latest scientific breakthrough. It was a trend. People believe it had life-giving, energizing properties. So naturally, companies did what companies do. They put it in everything. Toothpaste, water, chocolate, and yes, skincare. Beauty brands capitalized on radium's glowing reputation with products like Radior, face creams, and powders. They claimed radium would rejuvenate the skin, restore vitality, and make you look young and radiant, literally. It was marketed as science meets glamour, a radioactive blend of luxury and death. These weren't minor trace amounts either. Some products boasted about how much radium they contained. Ads showed beautiful women applying creams to their cheeks, smiling serenely, unaware they were marinating their skin cells in decay. Some companies even sold radium-infused soap, claiming it would stimulate cell activity, which I guess is technically true if you count cell mutation. Here's the plot twist that no one saw coming. Radiation is dangerous. Long-term exposure to radium can cause anemia, bone fractures, necrosis of the jaw, and cancer. The most infamous example, bring in the radium girls. Factory workers who painted watch dials with glow-in-the-dark radium paint and were told to lick the brushes to keep them sharp. Many suffered horrific health problems and died young. Their story helped spark major labor and health reforms. So yeah, not exactly the skincare routine you'd want to recreate on TikTok. At first, no. People genuinely believed radium was a miracle element. It wasn't until more and more women, and some men, started showing signs of radiation poisoning that the public actually started to catch on. But by then, the damage was done both to people and to the trust in science as marketing. Radium beauty products are one of history's most chilling examples of how chasing the latest miracle ingredient can end in disaster. The idea was to look younger, feel healthier, and radiate beauty. Unfortunately, the only thing that radiated was the product itself. So next time your moisturizer says all natural glow, maybe just double check that it doesn't actually glow in the dark. But before we move on, let's chat a little bit more about these radium girls and their historical legacy. If you think radium-infused skincare sounds bad, wait until you hear what happened to the women who made these glowing products. Spoiler, it wasn't just their cheeks lighting up, it was their bones. In the 1910s and 1920s, young women across the US, mostly teenagers and women in their early 20s, were hired to paint watch and clock dials with a special glow-in-the-dark paint made from radium. This was a high-tech job back then, scientific even, and you guys, it paid really well. It was a dream job for many. They worked for companies like US Radium Corporation in New Jersey and Radium Dial Company in Illinois. The paint? Nicknamed Undark because it glowed. Very catchy, but very cursed. To get the finest, most precise lines on the tiny numbers of watch dials, the girls were taught the lip, dip, paint technique. Lip the brush to a fine point with your mouth. Dip it in the paint, then paint the dial. Repeat, hundreds of times a day. They were told it was safe. In fact, supervisors sometimes told them it was healthy, that radium would put color in your cheeks, which it definitely did, just not in the way that they meant. At first, the women just felt really tired or had aching jaws. Then came the mystery toothaches, infections, and horrific symptoms like their teeth falling out and their jaws literally disintegrating. One woman went to her dentist with a sore tooth. He touched it, and her entire jawbone came out in his hand. Doctors were baffled. Company executives denied everything. They claimed the girls had syphilis to discredit them. Eventually, 5 women, later called the Radium Girls, took U.S. radium to court in 1927. They were gravely ill, some barely able to walk, but they testified anyway. The case made headlines across the country. The women won, but more importantly, the public outrage helped push through major labor reforms. It called for stricter industrial safety standards, the right of workers to sue for damages from occupational illness, and the founding of OSHA decades later. They didn't end up living long, but their bravery quite literally changed the laws around worker protection. Today, the Radium Girls are remembered not just as victims of a glowing fad gone horribly wrong, but as pioneers in the fight for workplace safety. Their case helped end the radium craze and expose the dangers of using science without regulation or accountability. They weren't just painting watches. They were unknowingly painting their way into history. Side note, if you guys want me to do a full video on Radium Girls, please drop me a comment below. So after radium skincare gave women a killer glow, literally, you might think the beauty world would cool it with the hazardous ingredients. But no. Next up, your hair. Because for a long time, if you wanted sleek, shiny locks or a stylish wave, you had to risk burning your scalp, losing your hair, or inhaling enough chemicals to fumigate a small building. From the early 1900s through the mid-20th century, beauty salons were practically chemistry labs. The goal? Smooth, straight, or tightly waved hair. The method? A terrifying array of chemicals, heavy metals, and heat that could fry your follicles faster than you could save volume and bounce. One of the most notorious ingredients in early hair relaxers, especially marketed to Black women, was lye, or sodium hydroxide. Yes, the same stuff used in drain cleaner. Applied to the scalp, it could chemically relax tightly coiled hair by breaking down protein bonds. But if left on too long or applied too often, it could also relax the top layers of your skin, as in burn them off. Scalp burns, permanent hair loss, and open wounds were common. Some women even wore wigs not for fashion, but to hide chemical damage caused from the treatments. Then there were the permanent wave machines in the 1920s and 30s, giant electrified contraptions that looked like something out of Frankenstein. Hair was wound around the metal rods, which were then heated to reshape it. The machine would hang from the ceiling with cords that connected to each rod. If it short-circuited, your new hairstyle might come with a side of electrical burns. Oh, and let's not forget about the fumes. Ammonia, formaldehyde, and other noxious chemicals turned many salons into glorified gas chambers. So yes, your hair had body, but your lungs paid the rent. Hair dyes were another culprit. In the early 1900s, many used lead acetate, which could gradually accumulate in the body over time. Meanwhile, hairsprays and setting lotions often included formaldehyde, which is now considered a known carcinogen. At the time, just part of your regular beauty routine. So, who was using this stuff? Well, basically everyone. These products were marketed to working women, Hollywood starlets, housewives, anyone who wanted to look put together in a culture that equated sleek hair with success. And again, just like with lead makeup and arsenic-laced dresses, the dangers were either not known or conveniently ignored. Beauty first, health eventually. Toxic hair products are a reminder that looking good was once a high-stakes game of chemical roulette. Sure, you might walk out of the salon with perfect curls or pin-straight back hair, but there was a non-zero chance you'd also lose some scalp real estate. So the next time you complain about humidity ruining your hairstyle, just be glad your flat iron isn't hooked up to a ceiling-mounted electric octopus. So after your skin's glowing with radiation, your hair is chemically cooked, and your dress could burst into flames, why stop there? Let's go all the way down to your feet. Because in Imperial China, tiny feet weren't just cute. They were the standard of beauty for nearly 1,000 years. But achieving them? Absolutely brutal. Foot binding began as early as the 10th century and became widespread by the Song dynasty. By the Qing dynasty, it was nearly universal among Han Chinese women, especially in wealthier families. Why? Because bound feet, or lotus feet, were considered the ultimate symbol of feminine beauty, obedience, and status. The ideal foot size? 3 inches. That's right, smaller than most smartphones. Girls as young as 4 or 5 would have their feet soaked in hot water, the toenails trimmed short, and then the toes, well, except for the big one, were broken and folded under the sole of the foot. Yes, broken on purpose. The arch was then crushed, and the foot was tightly bound in cloth to hold it in place. Over the years, the bindings were tightened repeatedly, forcing the bones to fuse in a curled, unnatural position. Walking became a lifelong struggle. Running, dancing, even standing for long periods, painful if not impossible. But the smaller the foot, the higher the social value of the woman. Foot binding started with the elite and trickled down to lower classes who wanted to imitate aristocratic fashion. For wealthier families, having bound feet signaled that a woman didn't need to do work. In poorer households, some girls had their feet bound to increase their chances of marrying up. In essence, crippling your child was considered a solid investment in her future. Foot binding led to lifelong disabilities, chronic pain, infections, and in some cases, gangrene and death. But many women still wore ornate embroidered shoes, smiling through the agony, because not having bound feet could mean social exile or being deemed unmarriageable. It wasn't until the early 20th century that foot binding began to fade, due to both political reforms and growing public awareness of its cruelty. But it left behind centuries of suffering, all in the name of beauty. Throughout history, fashion has demanded a lot from people. Sometimes their comfort, sometimes their money, and sometimes their health, sanity, or even their lives. From lead-laced makeup and arsenic green dresses, to flaming crinolines, radioactive face creams, scalp-searing hair treatments, and foot binding, one thing is clear. The pursuit of beauty has often been paved with pain. But here's the takeaway. These stories aren't just about the past. They're a mirror, a reminder to question why we value certain beauty standards and what we're willing to sacrifice for them. So whether you're rocking a no makeup look or full glam curly hair or buzz cut, high heels or sneakers, just be glad your skincare doesn't glow in the dark and your shoes don't require a bone-breaking ritual. Of course, it wasn't just clothing that was out to get you. Fashion may have been the outfit, but beauty was the accessory to murder. Because for centuries, people weren't just willing to suffer for beauty. They were willing to risk slow, painful poisoning for it. From lead-based makeup to radioactive face creams, the pursuit of a perfect look has been one of history's most dangerous pastimes. So let's now take a stroll through the vanity table of doom and see how deadly beauty can actually be. In the 1600s, pale skin wasn't enough. You had to look like your skin was so delicate you were practically see-through. Women would literally paint blue veins onto their chests to mimic marble statues. It was a strange way of saying, I'm rich, fragile, and probably dying of lead poisoning. And yes, the white powder they used to get that pale look contained lead, so they were, in fact, slowly killing themselves for the aesthetic. Meanwhile, in Japan, beauty meant the exact opposite of a Colgate ad. Married women, and sometimes men, dyed their teeth black with a mixture of iron, vinegar, and tea tannins. It was a symbol of maturity and commitment, and while it actually helped protect against cavities, you really didn't want to drink the stuff. It could be toxic over time. Imagine saying, I do, and then immediately ruining your wedding photos. For medieval men, it wasn't abs or biceps that made you attractive, it was your calves. A man's legs would be his best asset. So they wore hose and short tunics to show them off, sometimes even padding them if they were less than impressive. Henry VIII was obsessed with his own calves, which might explain why most of his portraits cut off just above the knee. No one was checking for six-packs. In ancient Maya society, beauty started young, like newborn young. Parents would bind a baby's head between boards to slowly elongate the skull. This wasn't torture. It was a symbol of nobility and connection to the gods. But it was risky. Too much pressure, and you could cause permanent damage or worse. Imagine explaining to a toddler why they can't take their headgear off. In Qing Dynasty China, super long fingernails, sometimes over 6 inches, were the ultimate status symbol, because they proved that you didn't have to do any manual labor. Some people even wore jewel-encrusted gold nail guards to protect them. Of course, having claws meant simple tasks were dangerous. Drop a dumpling? That's a health hazard. Now let's fast forward to the early 1900s, when the divorce corset came into style. Instead of pushing the breasts together, it separated them into 2 distinct curves, kind of like putting your chest on a brake. It forced the torso forward and the hips back, creating the S-curve silhouette. It also created back problems, difficulty breathing, and the occasional fainting spell. But hey, it's fashion. Going back to China, in ancient China, especially during the Tang Dynasty, eyebrows weren't just shaped. They were painted in blue, green, red, and even gold. Styles had poetic names like willow leaf and hanging moon. Unfortunately, some pigments were made from toxic minerals like lead and cinnabar, meaning your brows could make you look amazing right up to your health mysteriously declined. If you think overplucking in the 2000s was bad, Renaissance women, they took it to another level. A high forehead was the ultimate beauty ideal, so women shaved or plucked their hairline, sometimes all the way to the crown of their head. They'd also remove their eyebrows entirely. The result? Elegant, egg-like faces. The risk? Permanent hair loss and infections. Basically, they were beauty influencers before eyebrows were even allowed to exist. And finally, the Edwardian swayback look. Women wore corsets designed to thrust the chest forward and push the hips back, giving them the posture of a proud peacock. It screamed elegance and caused chronic back pain, spinal misalignment, and digestive issues. But, as history has shown, comfort has never been fashionable. So the next time someone says beauty is pain, just remember, at least your skincare routine doesn't involve lead, bone reshaping, or 6-inch talons. We've come a long way, and hopefully, we're not going back. That's it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, and comment below on the most ridiculous fashion trends you know of. And if you're still awake, I'll tend to the fire a little bit longer, hoping the crackling embers will put you to sleep. Until next time, take care.